The sky was slowly darkening over Jerusalem, but what was approaching was not merely the coming of night. Pause warns. It was the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and on the horizon beyond the ancient limestone walls something far greater than shadows was advancing. A storm of iron and fire marched relentlessly, as if the very earth had been summoned for judgment. Pause 0.5s. Babylon had awakened, and when Babylon awakened, kingdoms trembled. The sacred gates were shattered. The sound of splintering cedar mixed with the deafening clash of bronze. The temple, the dwelling place of the Most High, was profaned. Princes, nobles, and priests were thrown into chains, dragged through the very streets that had once sung psalms of glory. Pause 1/5s. Their cries were swallowed by the cold dust of exile. Among them was a young man, a face not yet marked by time, yet carrying a destiny that would echo across generations. Pause 0.5s. His name was Daniel, but listen closely. This is not merely the story of a captive. It is not simply the account of a prophet living in a foreign land. Pause warns. It is the beginning of an invisible war, a silent cosmic confrontation between the fading kingdoms of men and the eternal decrees of heaven. It is a whisper that travels through the centuries, a warning hidden beneath symbols, visions, and mysterious numbers. Pause 2s. Some say Daniel spoke only of the past. Others claim he saw the very end of time. But what if the words sealed for centuries are now on the verge of fulfillment? Pause once. What if the wise are finally beginning to understand? As Jerusalem burns, the sky is covered with dense, heavy clouds, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. Amid the screams and the thunder of collapsing walls, the Babylonian army advances without mercy. Pause 0.5s. Nebuchadnezzar, the shadow of dominion, watches from a distance. His eyes show no mercy, only calculation. He seeks to conquer more than bodies. He seeks to conquer minds. Pause 1.5s. Most people know the name Daniel, but almost no one knows the truth hidden beneath the surface of his visions. Today we decode the mystery that has remained unanswered for thousands of years. Pause 1s. Welcome to the revelation of Babylon. Pause 2s. To understand the prophecy, we must first understand the dust from which it rose. Pause ferns. Babylon was not merely a city, it was the world's first true superpower, a golden cage designed to swallow the identities of the nations it conquered. Under the shadow of the Etemenanke ziggurat, reaching toward the clouds like a defiant finger pointed at heaven, King Nebuchadnezzar built an empire of stone and logic. Pause 0.5s. But for the young exiles from Judah, this was not a land of wonder, it was a land of spiritual execution. The year was 605 BC. Pause warns. The Middle East was a chessboard of fire. The Egyptian forces had been crushed at Carchemish, and Jerusalem stood alone, a trembling remnant of David's glory. When the Babylonian wheels ground the Judean soil, they brought more than soldiers. They brought a calculated system of cultural erasure. Pause 0.5s. This is the context most people overlook. Daniel and his friends were not just prisoners, they were the spoils of war, selected for their intellect and physical perfection to be re-engineered into Babylonian elites. Nebuchadnezzar's strategy was surgical. He did not want to kill the best of his enemies, he wanted to own them. He wanted their minds to think in Chaldean, their tongues to speak in Akkadian, and their souls to bow to Marduk. Pause 2s. Imagine the psychological weight. You are pulled from the smoking ruins of your home. You are stripped of your royal garments and forced into a 3-year immersion of pagan philosophy. The food you are offered is a ritual. The wine is a libation to idols. Pause 1s. To the world, Babylon looked like the pinnacle of human achievement. But to the God of Israel, it was a testing ground, a furnace of identity where the gold of faith would either melt or be refined. Pause 1s. This was the era of the Great Transition, where the temporal power of a man-made throne began its collision course with the timeless authority of the Creator. Pause 2s. The gates of Babylon did not just lead to a city, they led to a psychological labyrinth. Pause 1s. For Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, the transition was violent, not to the body but to the soul. Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, was the architect of this transformation. His mission was simple yet deadly, to kill the Hebrew boy and birth a Babylonian servant. Pause 0.5s. This began with the names. In the ancient world, your name was your destiny, your identity, and your connection to the divine. Daniel, meaning God is my judge, was renamed Belteshazzar, an invocation to the wife of Marduk. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Pause warns. Every time they were called, they were forced to hear the names of foreign deities. It was a constant auditory assault on their faith. Pause 1.5s. But the strategy went deeper than phonetics. It reached the very table of the king. The royal delicacies were not just food, they were a covenant. To eat from the king's table was to acknowledge the king's ultimate provision and to participate in the sacrifices offered to Babylonian idols. Pause warns. To accept the meat was to accept the system. To drink the wine was to drown the memory of Zion. Pause 0.5s. This is where most men would have broken. Surrounded by gold, I'd offered the finest pleasures of the greatest empire on earth. Why resist? Pause warns. But here is what the history books often miss. Daniel saw through the luxury. He recognized that the delicacies were chains in disguise. Pause 1.5s. He understood that if he surrendered his appetite, he would eventually surrender his heart. The training hall was not a school, it was a battlefield of the will. Pause 0.5s. As the other captives succumbed to the pressure, 4 young men stood in silent, terrifying defiance. Pause 1s. They were about to challenge the entire dietary and religious foundation of the empire. Pause 1s. And in doing so, they were about to prove that there is a hunger that no earthly king can ever satisfy. Pause 2s. 10 days. Pause warns. That was the duration of the gamble. While the other youths indulged in the rich, heavy meats of the Babylonian gods, Daniel and his 3 brothers consumed nothing but vegetables and water. To the Babylonian physicians, this was a recipe for weakness, but to the God of Israel, it was a demonstration of dependence. Pause 0.5s. At the end of the trial, the results were undeniable. Their faces were not pale, they were radiant. Their minds were not sluggish. They were sharper than the king's most seasoned advisors. Pause 1.5s. But God did not stop at physical health. Pause 1s. For their faithfulness in the small things, he entrusted them with the weight of the universe. To the 4, God gave knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. But to Daniel, he gave a rare and dangerous gift. Pause 1s. The ability to understand visions and interpret the language of the night. Pause 1.5s. When the 3 years of training finally concluded, they were brought before Nebuchadnezzar himself. The throne room was a mountain of gold, designed to intimidate and diminish the human spirit. Pause 0.5s. Yet as the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his entire realm. Pause 1s. They were in Babylon, but they were no longer of Babylon. As they took their places among the counselors, the stage was set for a cosmic collision. Pause 1s. For while Nebuchadnezzar believed he was the master of destiny, a disturbance was brewing in the spiritual realm. The king was about to receive a message, a dream so terrifying that no human science could solve it. Pause 1s. The shadow of a great image was looming over the palace, and only the young man who refused the king's meat would be able to face the king's mind. Pause 2s. The peace of Babylon was an illusion. The real storm was about to begin. Pause 2s. The silence of a Babylonian night is never truly silent. Pause warns. Behind the massive walls of the palace, the air is thick with the scent of burning cedar and the distant hum of the Euphrates. But in the second year of his solo reign, King Nebuchadnezzar found a darkness that no torch could pierce. Pause 05s. He was at the height of his power, the undisputed master of the known world, yet as he lay upon his royal bed, a dream descended upon him, not as a fleeting thought, but as a crushing weight. Pause warns. It was a vision of such colossal significance that it shattered his spirit. When the king awoke, his face was drenched in sweat, his heart pounding like a war drum against his ribs. Pause 15s. The dream was there, pulsating in his mind just moments before, but as the morning sun touched the golden tiles of his chamber, the details vanished. Pause 0.5s. He knew it was a message from the divine, a verdict from the heavens, yet he could not grasp a single image. The frustration turned into a cold, sharp fury. Pause 1s. Without delay, the summons went out. The halls of the palace echoed with the hurried footsteps of the empire's elite, the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers. Pause warns. They gathered before the throne, a sea of robes and ancient scrolls, confident in their ability to manipulate the mysteries of the stars. But the king's demand was unprecedented. Pause 0.5s. Tell me the dream, he growled, his voice echoing like thunder. Not just the meaning, but the dream itself. If you are truly in contact with the gods, you do not need me to speak. Pause 2s. The air in the throne room turned to ice. Sir, pause 1s. The wise men looked at one another, their faces draining of color. They were used to interpreting riddles, not reading the silent archives of a man's mind. Pause 05s. They pleaded for the king to reveal the vision, but Nebuchadnezzar saw through their charade. He realized that their wisdom was a facade, a collection of memorized lies. Pause 15s. His decree was immediate and terrifying. If you cannot tell me the dream, there is but one decree for you. You shall be cut in pieces, and your houses made a dunghill. Pause 2s. The hunt for the wise men had begun, and among the condemned was Daniel. Pause 2s. The shadow of the executioner fell across Babylon before the sun could set. Pause warns. Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, moved through the streets with a heavy heart and a sharpened blade. The decree was absolute. Every wise man, every advisor, every scholar was to be slaughtered for the king's forgotten dream. When the guards arrived at the quarters of the Hebrew exiles, they did not find a man trembling in fear or hiding in the shadows. Pause 05s. They found Daniel. In the face of imminent death, Daniel did not react with panic. He reacted with prudence and discretion. Pause 1s. This is the first mark of the revelation, the ability to remain still when the world is in chaos. He looked into the eyes of the man sent to kill him and asked a question that cut through the king's hysteria. Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Pause 1.5s. Arioch explained the impossible demand, the failure of the magicians, and the fury of Nebuchadnezzar. Understanding the gravity of the spiritual moment, Daniel did not flee. He went directly into the presence of the king. Pause 1s. Imagine the audacity, a captive, a youth, walking into the throne room while the king was still breathing fire and blood. He did not offer a clever excuse. He asked for one thing only, time. Pause 05s. He promised that if given a moment, he would show the king the interpretation. The king, perhaps struck by the young man's inexplicable peace, granted the request. Pause warns. But Daniel did not use that time to consult books or study the stars. Pause 1s. He rushed to his house and gathered his brothers, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He told them the secret of the decree and urged them to plead for mercies from the God of heaven. Pause 1 This was not a strategy session, it was a desperate, holy intervention. They fell on their faces. aware that their lives, and the lives of all the wise men of Babylon, hung on a single thread of divine revelation. Pause 05s. They sought the secret from the only one who inhabits the light that no man can approach. Pause 1s. And in the depths of that night, while the empire slept in ignorance, the heavens opened to a captive. Pause 2s. The night was at its deepest point, the hour when the city of Babylon feels most like a tomb. Pause 1s. In a small room far from the opulence of the royal chambers, 4 young men remained in the posture of total surrender. They had exhausted their human strength. They had reached the end of their logic. And then, in a night vision, the dark veil of the king's forgotten mind was torn away by the hand of God. Pause 15s. The secret was revealed. On the mystery that had paralyzed the wisest men of the empire was laid bare before the eyes of a captive. But notice Daniel's immediate response. Pause 0.5s. He did not rush to the palace to save his life. He did not boast of his newfound power. Instead, he erupted into a prayer that remains one of the most profound declarations of God's sovereignty in all of Scripture. Pause. Farns. His voice, steady and filled with awe, rose through the stillness. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. Pause 1s. He recognized what the kings of the earth always forget. Pause 0.5s. That time and seasons are not governed by human politics, but by divine decree. He acknowledged that God is the one who removes kings and sets up kings. She pause 1.5s. This is the core of the Daniel revelation, that even in the heart of a pagan empire under the shadow of a tyrant, the throne of heaven remains the ultimate authority. Pause runs. Daniel was no longer just a victim of the Babylonian exile. He was now a steward of the Babylonian future. As the first light of dawn began to touch the Euphrates, Daniel stood up. The weight of the world's history was now resting on his shoulders. Pause warns. He sought out Arioch, the man who only hours ago was tasked with his execution. Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon, Daniel commanded with a new, quiet authority. Pause warns. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Pause 1s. The walk from his house to the throne room was the walk of a man who had already seen the end from the beginning. Knee pause 0.5s. He was walking into the mouth of the beast, carrying the light of a kingdom that would never pass away. Pause 2s. The doors of the great hall swung open with a sound that seemed to signal the end of an era. Pause ferns. Arioch led the young Hebrew toward the center of the room, where the atmosphere was thick with the scent of fear and the lingering smoke of failed incantations. There, on a throne of unparalleled gold, sat Nebuchadnezzar, a man whose single word could turn cities to ash. The king's eyes, bloodshot from sleeplessness and fury, locked onto Daniel. Pause 0.5s. The question he asked was a final ultimatum. Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Pause 1.5s. Daniel stood alone, yet he did not look like a captive. Pause 1s. In this moment, the hierarchy of the world was quietly inverted. Before answering the king, Daniel did something that shattered the pride of the Babylonian court. He looked the most powerful man on earth in the eye and declared that no human, no wise man, no enchanter, no magician could ever solve this mystery. Pause 0.5s. He stripped away the king's reliance on human intellect, but then he pointed to a higher throne. Pause 1s. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, Daniel proclaimed, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Pause 1.5s. The room fell into a silence so absolute you could hear the flickering of the torches. Pause 0.5s. Daniel was not there to win a reward or to earn a title. He was there as a vessel for a message that was already carved into the foundations of time. Me pause 1s. He began to recount the king's own mind back to him. He spoke of the king's thoughts as he lay on his bed, searching for the future. Pause ferns. As Daniel began to describe the vision, the king's expression transformed from skepticism to haunting recognition. Pause 0.5s. The forgotten images began to materialize in the air between them, the brilliance, the terror, and the metallic gleam of a colossus. Pause 1s. The revelation was no longer a secret. The invisible war had moved from the realm of dreams into the heart of the empire. Pause 2s. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. Pause farce. As Daniel spoke these words, the king's breath caught in his throat. The fog of his memory vanished, replaced by the terrifying brilliance of the vision. And Daniel began to describe a statue of such immense proportions that it seemed to bridge the gap between earth and sky. It was not a figure of grace, but a monument of overwhelming power and terrible splendor. Pause 1.5s. This was the blueprint of human history, a metallic map of every empire that would ever rise and fall. The head of this image was of fine gold, Daniel declared. Pause warns. In the torchlight of the palace, the word gold seemed to vibrate. It represented the absolute concentrated majesty of Babylon, the head, the brain, the golden beginning of the era of the Gentiles. But as the gaze moved downward, the glory began to diminish. Its chest and arms of silver, Daniel continued. Pause 0.5s. A second kingdom, inferior in quality but vast in reach, destined to follow the gold. Then, the middle and thighs of bronze, signaling a third empire that would rule with the edge of a sword. Pause 1.5s. The description became more ominous as Daniel reached the foundation. Its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Pause 1s. Iron, the metal of crushing force, of cold machinery and relentless conquest, but the clay revealed a hidden fragility, a fatal flaw in the final stage of human dominion. Pause 0.5s. The king listened, transfixed. He saw the progression of power from the purity of gold to the instability of dirt. Pause warns. But the vision did not end with a statue standing tall. It ended with a stone. Pause warns. A stone cut out by no human hand that struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Pause 1.5s. The colossus was not permanent, it was a target. And as the stone grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth, Nebuchadnezzar realized that his empire was merely a fleeting shadow in the light of an eternal kingdom. Pause 2s. The final words of the revelation hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Pause 1s. For a long moment, the great hall of Babylon was paralyzed. Then, in an act that defied the laws of the empire, the King of Kings, the man who commanded the sun to rise and the nations to burn, descended from his golden throne. To the shock of the gathered nobles, Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel. Pause 1.5s. The master of the world knelt before a captive youth, acknowledging that the message he carried was not of human origin. Truly, the king's voice broke through the silence, heavy with an unfamiliar reverence. So your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. Pause 1s. In that singular moment, the name of the God of Israel, once whispered in the dust of defeat, echoed with absolute authority through the corridors of pagan power. Nebuchadnezzar did not just offer praise, he offered promotion. Pause 0.5s. Daniel was lavished with gifts and appointed as the ruler over the entire province of Babylon. Yet, even in his exaltation, Daniel did not forget his brothers. At his request, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were elevated to high administrative positions, ensuring that the light of the truth would permeate the very structure of the government. Pause 1.5s. But history warns us that impact is not the same as transformation. Pause 1s. While the king's mind was convinced, his heart remained a battlefield, and the recognition of God's power was there, but the surrender of his own pride was still far away. Pause 0.5s. The seeds of a new crisis were already being sown in the soil of the king's vanity. He had been told he was the head of gold, but instead of gratitude, he felt a dangerous ambition. Pause ones. If he was the head, why not be the whole body? If his kingdom was destined to end, why not decree it to be eternal? Pause 1.5s. The shadow of the great image was gone, but the shadow of the king's ego was growing. Pause 0.5s. We are moving from the realm of dreams into the realm of fire, for in the plains of Dura an idol of gold is about to rise, and a furnace is about to be heated 7 times hotter. Pause ones. The real test of Daniel's God was only beginning. Pause twos. The interpretation begins where the image starts, at the top. Pause ones. You, O king, are the king of kings. You are this head of gold. Pause ferns. To understand why Babylon is represented by gold, we must look beyond the literal wealth of the city. Yes, Babylon was draped in gold. Its temples, its altars, and its statues shimmered with it. But the gold in Daniel's decoding represents a specific type of authority. Pause 0.5s. Absolute autocracy. In Nebuchadnezzar's realm, the king's word was the final law of the universe. There were no senates to consult, no constitutions to follow. The head of gold represents the purity of power, a time when a single human will govern the known world with divine-like pretension. Pause ones. But there is a hidden warning in this metallic symbol. Gold is the most precious of metals, but it is also the softest. Pause ones. It represents a glory that is brilliant to the eye but lacks the structural integrity to last forever. By identifying Nebuchadnezzar as the head, Daniel was delivering a double-edged message. Pause 0.5s. He was validating the king's current majesty, but he was also defining its limits. He was telling the man who thought he was a god that he was merely a section of a larger timeline. Pause 1.5s. A head cannot exist without a body, and a body implies a sequence. Babylon was the head because it set the pattern for all Gentile empires that would follow: the pride, the rebellion against the Creator, and the desire to build a name for oneself. Pause ones. But notice the shift. As soon as the interpretation leaves the gold, the value of the metal drops while the hardness increases. Pause 0.5s. This is the great paradox of human history that Daniel is revealing. As the centuries pass, human kingdoms will become more militarily powerful, more technologically advanced, but morally and spiritually they will become lesser. Pause ones. We are moving from the preciousness of the soul to the coldness of the machine. Pause twos. The transition from gold to silver is not a promotion, it is a descent. Pause twos. As the vision moves from the head to the chest, the gold fades into silver. Pause ones. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Pause ones. This is the Medo-Persian Empire, but why silver? Pause 0.5s. If gold represents the absolute divine-like authority of a single mind, silver represents a divided power, 2 arms joined at the chest. Pause ones. The Medes and the Persians. Historians tell us that while Medo-Persia was geographically larger than Babylon, its government was inferior in its concentration of power. Pause 0.5s. In Babylon, the king was the law. In Persia, the king was subject to the law, the famous law of the Medes and Persians, which could not be altered even by the monarch himself. Pause 1.5s. The silver represents this shift toward bureaucracy and legalism. The power was becoming harder, more rigid, but less precious than the golden autocracy of Nebuchadnezzar. There is a profound spiritual lesson here for the modern seeker. Pause ones. As human systems expand, they often become more complex and colder. The silver arms of Persia were efficient at tax collection and military logistics, but they lacked the spiritual headship that Babylon once possessed. Pause ones. They were the arms that embraced the world, but also the arms that crushed it through sheer numbers. Daniel was revealing a decline in the value of the human soul within the machinery of the state. Pause twos. While the world saw progress, better roads, faster messengers, larger armies, heaven saw a degradation of the image of God. Pause ones. We are witnessing the beginning of a pattern. The more we rely on the arms of human strength and the silver of economic systems, the further we drift from the golden source. Pause 1.5s. But the descent does not stop at silver. The vision continues to drop, moving from the chest to the belly, from silver to the hard ringing sound of bronze. Pause twos. From the silver chest, the vision descends further to the belly and thighs of bronze. Pause ones. And a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Pause ones. This is the Grecian Empire, led by the meteoric rise of Alexander the Great. But why bronze? Pause 05s. To the ancient mind, bronze was the metal of resonance and warfare. It was louder, brighter, and more piercing than silver or gold. Pause warns. It represents an empire built on the speed of human intellect and the sharp edge of the sword. Alexander did not just conquer territories, he conquered minds. He brought Hellenization, the spread of Greek language, philosophy, and art, to every corner of the known world. Pause ones. If Babylon was the head, the will, and Persia was the arms, the law, then Greece was the belly, the center of appetite, expansion, and worldly wisdom. Pause 05s. The bronze represents a kingdom that is brilliant in its cultural achievements, but increasingly hollow in its spiritual foundation. Greek philosophy questioned everything but worshipped the human mind as the ultimate measure of truth. Pause 1.5s. There is a sobering revelation here for our modern age. Pause ones. We often mistake shining achievements for eternal value. The Grecian bronze filled the world with logic and theater, yet it could not answer the deep cry of the human soul that Daniel's God addressed. Pause warns. The bronze was strong enough to shatter the silver of Persia, but it was still just a belly, a transient phase that would eventually give way to something much darker and much heavier. Pause 0.vs. As we look at the statue, we see a terrifying trend. As the value of the metal decreases, on the noise and the hardness increase. Pause ones. The world was becoming a place of cold metal and clashing shields. The era of the precious was ending, and the era of the crushing was about to begin. Pause 1.5s. For below the bronze thighs, the vision reveals the most frightening element of all, the legs of unyielding iron. Pause twos. Below the thighs of bronze, the statue takes a dark and terrifying turn. Pause warns. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. Pause 1.5s. This is the Roman Empire, the iron legs that would eventually march across the spine of the known world. But notice the shift in the prophecy's language. Daniel does not speak of Rome's beauty, its art, or its gold. He speaks only of its teeth. Pause warns. He speaks of its ability to break, to bruise, and to crush. Iron is the metal of the machine. See, it is cold, unyielding, and lacks the inherent value of gold or silver. Pause 05s. It represents a kingdom that rules not by the head of a brilliant king, nor by the arms of a legal code, but by the legs of a relentless military engine. Rome was the first empire to truly industrialize conquest. Pause ones. It did not just defeat its enemies, it disintegrated them. It paved the world with roads so its iron boots could stomp out the fires of rebellion in every province. Pause ones. There is a profound spiritual warning here for our age of technology and power. Pause 1.5s. The iron represents the dehumanization of authority. As we move further down the statue, the human element becomes buried under the weight of the system. Rome was a beast of iron that crucified the King of Glory, showing that when human power reaches its iron stage, it becomes a direct enemy of the divine. Pause 1s. But iron has a fatal weakness. Pause 1s. It is strong, but it is brittle. It can crush, but it cannot heal. Pause 0.5s. And as we look even further down to the very base of the Colossus, we see the most bizarre and unstable mixture in the history of prophecy. Pause 1s. Iron mingled with miry clay. Pause 1s. The empire was strong enough to break the world, but it was not united enough to hold itself together. Pause 2s. The vision reaches its lowest point, not just in height, but in stability. Pause 1s. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. Pause 1s. This is the world we inhabit today. The iron of the Roman influence remains, our laws, our languages, our military structures, but it is now mixed with miry clay. Pause 0.5s. In the original language, this refers to the clay of a potter, a material that can be molded but can never truly fuse with metal. This clay represents the human element, the diverse and often conflicting wills of the nations. Pause 1s. Daniel reveals a profound geopolitical truth. In the final stage of human history, empires will attempt to mingle themselves with the seed of men, trying to create global unity through treaties, alliances, and technology. Pause 1s. We see it in our modern unions and international leagues, but they will not cleave one to another, just as iron does not bond with clay. Pause 1.5s. The more we try to force a global identity, the more the individual fractures appear. After there is a terrifying warning here for the 21st century. Pause 1s. We live in an era of brittle power. We have the iron of nuclear weapons and digital surveillance, yet our societies are held together by the clay of fragile economies and social unrest. Pause 1s. The statue is now top-heavy. The gold, silver, bronze, and iron are all resting on a foundation that is fundamentally broken. Pause 0.5s. The colossus of human achievement is standing on its tiptoes, swaying in the winds of change. Pause 1.5s. Most people look at the news and see political shifts. Daniel looks at the feet and sees the end of an era. Pause 1s. The mixture cannot hold. The fragility is a divine signal that the time of the Gentiles is drawing to a close. Pause 1s. And as the statue trembles, and a shadow begins to move from the mountains, a force that is not made of metal and not made by man. Pause 2s. As the king gazed at the fragile feet of iron and clay, the vision shifted from the metallic to the supernatural. Pause 1s. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Pause 1.5s. This is the final act of the human drama. The stone is the most significant symbol in the entire book of Daniel. It was not quarried by human labor, not shaped by human politics, and not launched by human military might. Pause 0.5s. It represents a kingdom of a completely different origin. Notice the target. Pause 1s. The stone does not strike the head of gold or the chest of silver. It strikes the feet. And this reveals a profound truth about the timing of the end. The final blow to human pride comes when the world is in its most divided and brittle state. When the stone struck, the entire colossus, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, and the clay, was crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. Pause warns. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. Pause 1 point phase. All the glory of Babylon, the might of Rome, and the sophistication of the modern age vanished in an instant before the weight of the eternal, but the stone did not remain a stone. Pause ferns. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Pause warns. While human empires always start large and crumble into dust, the kingdom of God starts as a small stone and grows until it encompasses everything. Daniel was showing Nebuchadnezzar and us that there is only one permanent reality. Pause, 0 point thieves. Every government you see today, every currency you trust, and every border you defend is part of a statue that is destined to fall. Pause ones. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Pause 1 fives. This is the aha moment for every seeker of truth. We are not waiting for a better human leader. We are waiting for the stone. Pause ones. The transition is absolute. The reign of man is a dream that is ending. The reign of God is the reality that is beginning. Pause twos. The question is no longer who will rule the world, but rather, where do you stand when the stone falls? Pause threes. The acknowledgement of God is not the same as the surrender to God. Pause ones. This is the hidden tragedy of King Nebuchadnezzar. Although he had fallen on his face before Daniel, and although he had witnessed the unveiling of a mystery no human mind could grasp, the seed of pride remained deep within the soil of his heart. Pause ferns. As the years passed, the terrifying image of the statue began to transform in his memory. He no longer saw it as a warning of his empire's end. He saw it as a challenge to his legacy. Pause 1.5s. The prophecy had declared that he was the head of gold, but for a man of Nebuchadnezzar's ambition, being the head was not enough. Pause 0.5s. If he was gold, why should his kingdom ever give way to silver? Why should the glory of Babylon ever diminish into bronze or iron? In pause ones. In a direct affront to the divine revelation, the king gave a command that would change the landscape of the plain of Dura. He did not build a statue of 4 metals. He built a colossus made entirely of gold, from the crown of its head to the soles of its feet. Pause. 1.5s. 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, it stood against the sky as a golden rebellion. It was his way of saying, "My kingdom will never fall. There will be no succession. There is only Babylon. There is only me." Pause ones. This was the birth of a new kind of war, not a war of swords, but a war of worship. Pause warns. The king issued a decree that echoed to the ends of his domain. When the music played, the cornet, flute, harp, and psaltery, every official, every governor, and every citizen was commanded to fall and worship the golden image. For pause 0.5s. The penalty for nonconformity was immediate and horrific, the blazing furnace. Pause ones. Nebuchadnezzar was attempting to unify the clay of the nations through the iron of fear and the gold of his own ego. Pause ones. But in the midst of a sea of bending knees, 3 shadows remained upright. Pause warns. The stage was set for the fire to reveal what the gold could not. Pause twos. The golden image stood silent, but the air around it was screaming with tension. Pause ones. As the music faded, a group of high-ranking officials stepped forward with a malicious intent. They did not target the king's enemies, they targeted his most faithful servants. "There are certain Jews," they whispered into the king's ear, "who pay no attention to you, O king, and they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image." Pause ones. In an instant, the king's admiration for the Hebrew God vanished, replaced by a furious rage. Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. His face was distorted with pride. Pause 0.5s. He offered them one final chance to survive, but his offer was laced with a blasphemous challenge. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Pause 1.5s. The king believed his authority was the ceiling of the universe. He believed that even the God who revealed the dream was powerless against the furnace of the empire, but the response of the three young men remains one of the most powerful declarations of faith in human history. Pause 1s. They did not beg for their lives. They did not try to negotiate with a tyrant. With steady voices, they looked at the master of the world and said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." Pause warns. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. Pause warns. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods. Pause 2s. This is the hidden layer of true spiritual maturity. Pause warns. Their faith was not based on a guarantee of safety, but on the sovereignty of God. They were telling the king that even if God chose to let them burn, he was still God, and Nebuchadnezzar was still just a man. Pause 1s. The king's fury exploded. He commanded the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than ever before. Pause 0.5s. The heat was so intense it killed the very soldiers who threw them in. Pause 1s. As the 3 men fell, bound and helpless, akin to the heart of the fire, it seemed that the iron of Babylon had finally crushed the spirit of the faithful. Pause 1s. But the fire was not an ending, it was a meeting place. Pause 2s. The king sat on his elevated dais, his eyes fixed on the roaring mouth of the furnace, waiting for the silence of death. Pause warns. But instead of the smell of charred flesh, a strange, cool light began to radiate from within the inferno. Nebuchadnezzar's expression shifted from triumph to absolute terror. He rubbed his eyes, leaning forward until the heat singed his royal robes. Pause warns. His voice, usually a thunderous command, was now a trembling whisper. Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Pause 1.5s. His counselors nodded in fear. True, O king. Pause 0.5s. But Nebuchadnezzar was no longer looking at them. He was staring into the impossible. Look, he cried. I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Pause 1.5s. This is the supreme revelation of the book of Daniel. Pause warns. God does not always keep his people from the fire, but he always meets them in the fire. The 4th man was not a spectator, he was a companion. The fire which was intended to consume them had only consumed their bonds. Pause warns. They were loose, walking freely in the place of their intended execution. Nebuchadnezzar approached as close as he dared and called them out. As Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped onto the cool sand of the plain, the entire court gathered around them in stunned silence. Pause 1s. Their hair was not singed. On their robes were not scorched. There was not even the smell of smoke upon them. Pause 1.5s. The king was forced into a second confession. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he declared. Pause warns. He saw that no human power could compete with a faith that is willing to die. However, pay close attention to the king's reaction. He issued a decree to protect the Jews, but he still spoke of God as their God, not his God. Pause warns. The fire had burned his pride for a moment, but the roots of his ego were deep. Pause 0.5s. He was impressed by the miracle, but he was not yet broken by the truth. Pause warns. The greatest humbling of the head of gold was still to come, not through fire, but through the wild grass of the field. Pause 2s. Pride has a way of returning, even after the fire has cooled. Here, pause 1s. Years had passed since the miracle of the furnace, and Babylon had grown into a paradise of hanging gardens and impenetrable walls. But peace, for a man like Nebuchadnezzar, was a dangerous breeding ground for self-exaltation. Pause warns. One night the king was visited by a vision that made the golden statue seem small by comparison. He saw a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. Pause 0.5s. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and under its shadow, all the beasts of the field found shelter. It was a vision of perfect centralized power, the ultimate global tree. Pause warns. But as the king watched, a holy watcher descended from heaven with a cry that shook the foundations of the palace. Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip its leaves and scatter its fruit. Pause 1.5s. Yet, on the decree contained a strange, merciful detail. Leave the stump with its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. Pause warns. The king awoke in a cold sweat. He knew the magicians of Babylon were useless. He called for Daniel. When Daniel heard the dream, he was astonished for 1 hour, his thoughts troubling him. Pause warns. He did not feel joy at the king's coming fall. He felt the heavy burden of a prophet who loves the soul of the person he must warn. "My lord," Daniel whispered, "may the dream be for those who hate you." Pause 1.5s. He revealed the terrifying truth. The tree was Nebuchadnezzar. His greatness had reached the heavens, but his pride had reached the limit of God's patience. Pause 0.5s. Daniel offered a final bridge of escape. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness. Again your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed. Pause once. This is the hidden layer of divine judgment. It is always preceded by an invitation to repent. Pause warns. But for the head of gold, mercy was a language he had forgotten how to speak. The countdown to the 7 years of madness had begun, and the crown was about to be traded for the beast's skin. Pause 2s. 12 months of mercy had passed since the dream of the tree. Pause ferns. Heaven had given the king a full year to repent, to show mercy, and to humble his soul. But on a fateful evening, as Nebuchadnezzar walked upon the royal terrace of Babylon, his heart swelled with the poison of self-worship. He looked out over the blue glazed tiles of the Ishtar Gate and the towering ziggurats and said, "Is not this great Babylon, in which I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Pause 1.5s. The words were still warm on his lips when a voice fell from heaven like a lightning bolt. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you." Pause once. In that exact moment, the head of gold lost its reason. The mind that had governed empires was suddenly plunged into the darkness of an animal's instinct. He was driven from the company of men. He lived in the open fields. Pause 0.5s. For 7 seasons, the dew of heaven drenched his skin. His hair grew long and matted like the feathers of an eagle. His nails became like the claws of a bird. Pause warns. The man who wanted to be a god was reduced to a beast. This is the hidden layer that every global leader must fear. Our pause ones. It is the reminder that human sanity and human authority are not inherent rights, they are divine loans. Pause ones. The band of iron and bronze around the stump was holding him, preserving his life even in his madness. At the end of the 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar lifted his eyes to heaven. In that act of looking up, his reason returned. Pause 1/5. He did not return to the throne with a decree of his own greatness. Instead, he wrote a letter to the whole world, declaring that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Pause warns. He acknowledged that those who walk in pride, God is able to humble. Pause 0/5. The head of gold had finally been refined in the furnace of humiliation. Pause warns. But while the king had learned his lesson, the empire was already moving toward a new kind of darkness. Here, pause ones. A grandson was coming who would not share this humility. The hand of judgment was preparing to write on a different wall. Pause twos. The fire of Babylon has faded, the golden walls have crumbled, and the writing on the wall has long since been fulfilled. Pause ones. But as we stand in the twilight of our own era, the shadows of Daniel's vision remain as sharp as ever. We have traveled from the head of gold to the brittle feet of iron and clay. We have seen that human history is not a random collection of events, but a calculated descent, a countdown of kingdoms that leads to a single inevitable conclusion. Pause 1/5. What have we learned from the young exile who refused the king's meat? Pause ones. We have learned that the true measure of a man is not the titles he holds in an earthly palace, but his standing before the throne of heaven. Daniel was a captive, yet he was the freest man in the empire. He was an advisor to tyrants, yet his soul belonged only to the Most High. Pause. Ones. His life reveals the first great truth. Pause 0.5s. You do not have to be a victim of your circumstances. You can be a steward of a revelation. As we look at the feet of the statue today, the mixture of global strength and internal fracture, we must realize that we are the generation living in the final seconds of the metallic image. Pause ones. The iron of secular power and the clay of human ideology are failing to hold the world together. The anxiety you feel when you watch the news, the sense that the foundations are shaking, this is not a coincidence. Pause ones. It is the resonance of the approaching stone. Pause 1.5s. History is not spiraling out of control, it is spiraling toward its center. Our pause 0.5s. Every empire that tried to replace God, from Nebuchadnezzar's gold to Belshazzar's blasphemy, ended in the same dust. But the God of Daniel remains. He is the revealer of mysteries, the sustainer in the fire, and the architect of the mountain that is to come. Pause twos. So where does this leave us? Pause warns. We are the residents of the feet of iron and clay. We live in a world that is technologically iron but socially clay. We see the same pride that consumed Nebuchadnezzar and the same mockery that destroyed Belshazzar rising again in our halls of power. Pause warns. But remember, the stone is not coming to destroy the world. It is coming to establish a kingdom that can never be shaken. Daniel's secret was not just in his ability to interpret dreams, but in his refusal to bow. Like pause ones. He stood tall in Babylon because he was already kneeling before heaven. Today, the call to each of us is the same. In a world of golden idols and fiery furnaces, you are called to be a Daniel. Pause 0.5s. You are called to stand with the truth, even when the music plays and the crowd bows. You are called to trust the God who reveals mysteries, even when your own life feels like it's in the shadows of exile. Pause 1/5s. The truth was hidden for centuries, but now it has been revealed. Pause ones. The countdown is real, the stone is certain. The question is no longer, when will the end come, but who do you serve today? Pause twos. If this revelation has touched your soul, do not let it end here. Pause ones. This is not just a video to be watched, it is a message to be carried. Stand with the truth. I share this revelation with someone who is searching for hope in a crumbling world. Help us spread this wisdom to those who feel lost in the dust of modern Babylon. Pause 1/5s. Let your light be a testament to the kingdom that will never pass away. Pause 1s. Take a moment for your soul. Remember who you are. Remember whose you are. Pause 2s. Until the next revelation, stand firm. Pause 3s.